colleague Tim Morris. We're at NOLA.com in the Times-Picayune, and we're coming to you this morning with a new format. We're on Facebook Live, and we are not only going to be doing the same thing that we typically do, which is talk about the news of the day, but we're also giving you the opportunity to ask us questions while we're on camera live. So you can fill in your questions in that comment box below our video and ask us the questions relevant to this topic of conversation. Today, once again, we are talking about another mass shooting in the United States. These things seem to be happening with rather disturbing frequency. After the incident in Las Vegas last month, now we have an incident at Sutherland Springs, Texas, where a gunman who was a veteran of the Air Force, Devin Kelley, age 26, goes into First Baptist Church there, apparently looking for his in-laws, who he has had some type of vendetta against, and ends up killing 26 people there at that church during morning worship service. This has once again created another discussion about what we can do to prevent these, but what is different about this, Tim, is that some laws are already in effect that should have prevented him from getting his hands on weapons.
If there's anybody who should not have had a gun, he was that person, and there were laws in effect. He had mental health problems, he had been involved in domestic violence, he had been discharged, not dishonorably, but bad conduct, discharge from the Air Force. All of these things together clearly disqualified him, and we find out, and I know you've written about it, I'm going to have a chance for you to expand on that a little bit, but his name should have been in a database that would have prevented him from getting the weapons that he used.
Yeah.
He lied on the application about some of his background, but this FBI NCIC check is supposed to fix that, and it turns out the Air Force had not forwarded that information.
We seem to be learning that this is a problem with the military in general, not just with the Air Force by itself.
Right, and the thing is that, so like you wrote a column, really good column that's up on NOLA.com right now for people to go read, that Louisiana had kind of been in the forefront in 2014 and passed some laws that have this effect of taking guns or barring people from having guns who have been involved in domestic violence. And just real quick is that we found a link. A lot of these people who have been involved in these mass shootings have some domestic violence in their background. And
yeah, Elena Moreno calls it a very strong common denominator for a lot of the people.
Right. She has a great quote saying, if you're going to abuse your family members, then why wouldn't you obviously feel that way about people? But so tell us a little bit about the Louisiana situation and where we stand now, and would he have been able to buy the guns in Louisiana?
Well, in my conversation with Representative Moreno, one of the things she said was that they felt like information wasn't always getting into the databases the way that it was supposed to do. And so what happened with Devin Kelley seems to be another confirmation of the fact that there's something happening where the information about a person's violent tendencies is not getting into the database the way they're supposed to. So Louisiana's law mirrors federal law in many ways. Actually, the federal law makes it a lifetime ban, but the state law says you can't buy a weapon 10 years after your sentence is completed. And you're not supposed to be able to buy a weapon if there is a protective order against you. So both of those things are supposed to send up red flags to a gun merchant who is doing the federal background check. What she was not able to get the legislature to do was to set up a system where people could actually relinquish their weapons. So, for example, in St. Tammany Parish on Sunday night, we had a murder-suicide where an ex-boyfriend reportedly killed a woman that he had been stalking and then killed himself. According to the woman's family, there was a protective order out against him, but the aunt said the law failed us. And so Representative Moreno's position is, if you tell people that they're prohibited from buying weapons, they're prohibited from buying weapons, yes, they're prohibited from having weapons, but there's no mechanism to have them to turn over those weapons, then you're really just wagging a finger at them and not doing enough to address the problem.
Right, and apparently there was resistance even from the judges to enforcing it, because the idea would be if I had received such a restraining order or was involved in the domestic violence, that I would give my guns to a third party that the courts decided would hold them until I was allowed to have them again. So you kind of understand that is a lot for a court to have to deal with. But so what we're left with now is essentially the paper saying I'm not supposed to have these guns.
Correct. But nobody actually making sure that you have given your guns to somebody else who's responsible. She says she drafted 18 different versions of the bill, trying in some attempt to get people to buy into it. One of the more interesting things, though, in my conversation with her, was she said that she had problems even getting the district attorneys and sheriffs in rural parts of Louisiana to sign under her bill that actually did pass, the bill that prevents people from getting weapons. And she said that some of the people in those rural parishes acted as if to separate a man from his weapons was like the worst possible punishment they could actually imagine. Well, he won't be able to hunt if you don't let him have his guns. And so, in my opinion, district attorneys are not typically so concerned about a defendant's rights in that way, but that's the opposition that we're facing, where even the people who are typically very, very hard on crime and very, very harsh on the people who are suspected of crimes are in this situation, and probably only this situation, really overly concerned about a person's rights to own a weapon.
Right, the person who's actually been involved in some crime, that they're as far as the punishment. So we do have a question from Timothy, and it's not me, Timothy, but Timothy who's watching us. Why can we not treat guns like automobiles, state registry with periodic inspection of weapon and owner?
Well, I think the biggest reason we don't is because the NRA and others make the slippery slope argument that once you do one thing, you're going to do other things, and their chief motivation seems to be to prevent any of these laws from taking effect. One of the things that Representative Moreno said was that she was only able to get her law passed in 2014 because the NRA went neutral on it. If the NRA had opposed her, there would have been no chance that she would have gotten such a bill passed, because the lawmakers who want and covet a grade from the NRA are not going to go against them for any reason.
And I want to interject some optimism into this, because actually I find some in what happened. So obviously we have another tragedy, 26 people killed, another 20 wounded, from the age of 18 months up to 77, a pregnant woman, a family of 8 that was there worshiping at the church. And so I understand the people out there right away, the reaction is, why can't we stop this? This is so ridiculous. But I am encouraged by the fact that even though that there was a failure here by the Air Force to pass this information on, if the law had acted as it should have, he would have been flagged. Now, he might have got the guns otherwise, and this is what I think we all have to recognize, is that we can't stop every one of these. But I'm optimistic. I'm glad that there were laws in place, and that hopefully now Senator John Cornyn from Texas, the second-ranking senator in the Senate, is pushing for, first off, finding out what happened with the military, and secondly, maybe closing some loopholes and allowing even more reporting. Because apparently the one little sliver in this whole polarized debate that there's some agreement on is the background checks. Because the idea being, someone who's mentally ill, someone who has a record of violence should not have guns. We all agree on that. So now it's just a matter of fixing the laws that we have. And as something like this happens, addressing them. So I'm really encouraged that a Republican from Texas is leading the way in trying to fix it.
And I think so. What I find remarkable about this story in particular is I think it moves us out of that typical debate, more laws or whatever the case may be. I don't know anybody, maybe there are some people who would argue against the laws that are already in place that should have kept this man from buying a gun. I think we can all agree, okay, this is a sensible law, this is sensible legislation. You shouldn't have somebody who's made these types of threats being able to go to the store. The Academy Sports is where he
Right.
went and just buy.
He bought 2 weapons, I think, within a month or so.
From 2 separate stores. And again, Academy's statement is, we ran the background check. He came up
Right.
clear in the background check. Now we know why he came up clear in the background check, because the military didn't turn over the information they were supposed to.
Right, and there's been some studies, just to go back to what we were talking about earlier, that maybe 30% of these reports that should be in the database from the military are not getting there.
Yeah.
So again, it's a positive maybe that we're going to look at that and fix that. And I would also say that I recognize again that people see this, and the first thought for a lot of people is we got to get rid of all guns. Well, I'm just saying, that's not going to happen.
Correct.
And we do, however you feel about how Heller the case of Heller was interpreted by the Supreme Court in 2008, that solidified the idea that we have a right to own guns. And so I think that we need to realize that addressing these issues that we all agree need to be addressed is still going to be a slower process of smaller steps. And so the idea of now that you have a legislature in Louisiana that's willing to do these background checks and record this,
Yeah.
and that a senator from Texas, another red state, is willing to push for this, I think are positive signs that we are at least moving in the right direction.
And I would hope, I know it's a long shot right now, that Louisiana would move to become a state that does have like a relinquishment law in place. From my research yesterday, I found a study in a medical journal that said the homicides are down 14% in those states that actually have laws that say you have to turn over your weapons, or you have to sell it to somebody, or you have to get them out of your possession. And as Moreno herself says, of course, there are some people who are just going to get a gun.
Right.
It doesn't
Right.
matter.
Right.
There are some people who are so cold-blooded and conniving and just an anger that won't die, that they're going to find a way around the law to get their hands on weapons. But there are some people you're going to put up that obstacle, and the obstacle is going to stop them.
Right.
And so at the very least, we should have
Right.
a system where you say you can't buy these weapons when we have a protective order against you, which we have. But is there some way to protect the woman who died in St. Tammany Parish
Right.
Sunday night?
Right.
If you're telling a judge, I'm going to give over my weapon, but the judge or the sheriff or nobody else ever actually sees you give your weapons to anybody, what good does that do?
Right. And I know that you and I have been in this business long enough that we've seen these horrible stories of women with restraining orders, and all it was a piece of paper that obviously didn't stop. But it is
Yeah.
something. And
Yeah.
I do feel like that it allows for a woman to call police right away and say, this person, I have a restraining order, and the police might react more quickly.
Yeah.
So some of the things that we do for limiting guns can also have an impact, as you say.
Yeah.
And too, I think that often when we start talking about guns, that there's this bigger picture. Obviously, a lot of crime and a lot of killings in New Orleans and any other city happen with handguns.
Correct.
And that's a whole different issue.
Yeah.
Crime overall is down. Homicide has ticked back up. But before we start, or as we start to move to talk about what to do with that, I think this mass shootings, everyone agrees we shouldn't live in a country where this kind of thing can be so easy, and it's happening more often.
Yeah.
That we can tackle some of these laws. So you don't have to just throw up your hands and somebody say, well, Second Amendment, you're not touching my guns.
Yeah.
Or to say we have to take all guns away. There are steps that we can take, I think, to help mitigate what's going on.
Correct. You mentioned earlier in one of our conversations about making sure that fingerprint information gets into the right databases. Was this from Corcoran as well? Was this?
It was in a general discussion about how different databases are not, or how reports from states are not always getting into the national database. And one of them is that when there's a misdemeanor domestic violence charge, that some states don't fingerprint. I haven't had a chance to check to see whether that's Louisiana's case or not, but don't fingerprint the person who's charged or convicted of this. Therefore, that can't get into the database. So again, I would hope that Louisiana lawmakers, whether it be Moreno or J.P. Morrell and others who worked on the previous bills, look at this and say, this is a way for us to put more people in this database that should not have guns. We all agree they should.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, since this is called Common Ground, last year at the Supreme Court, This case actually reached the Supreme Court, where someone was challenging the law that prevented people from misdemeanor domestic abuse from owning weapons. And I think Elena Kagan wrote the majority opinion upholding the law. It was 6-2, with the dissent being Clarence Thomas and Sonia Sotomayor, which is probably the only time they found common ground on anything.
That's probably true.
It's interesting, though, that those 6 justices decided and said, you know, this is serious enough and this is significant enough that we think that it is constitutional to keep people, even if they didn't commit a felony,
right,
you know, from owning weapons of this sort.
Right, and so the courts are starting to recognize, or have recognized, that there can be limits, and again, as these tragedies, hopefully more don't happen. But just this year, we've had so many people killed at single instances. So I think kind of wrapping up that you know, some positive things are happening. There are still some really difficult issues that'll have to happen at the state and the national level in the court system to deal with this, and we hope that we don't have to come back anytime soon to talk about another mass shooting.
For sure.
But just to remind you that we started on Facebook Live today, and so this is a chance for you to talk to us as well. We appreciate the comment that we did get. And if you have any other thoughts, you can still put them beneath the post, and we will take those into consideration. We're still trying to figure out some best ways that we can kind of talk about some issues and keep you informed. And so we hope that you'll keep checking us out at NOLA.com and reading us in the Times-Picayune and joining us back the next time that we're here for Common Ground.